Hello and welcome to this webinar. This is the fourth edition of a cycle of webinars dedicated to pine plantation all over the world. Today, the session will be dedicated to Pinus patula plantations in Africa. My name is Margarida Mendes Silva. I'm a forest engineer and a senior project manager of Centro PINUS. Centro PINUS is a non-governmental organization focused on maritime pine sector in Portugal. We are continuously learning how to improve maritime pine silviculture and management, all other issues related with forest sustainability. One way to do this is to reach out to colleagues in other countries and ask them to share their knowledge, experience, and information. We realized that more of you could benefit from this and decide to promote an international series of webinars to discuss the successful factors in pine production. Our partner in this cycle of webinars is the Unit of Ecology and Silviculture of Pine from IUFRO. Representing this unit of IUFRO, we have with us today Professor Teresa Fonseca from one of the main Portuguese universities related with agroforestry issues. Teresa, could you please present IUFRO unit that you represent and share with us the objectives of this cycle of webinars? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Margarida. Dear participants, welcome to the third webinar session organized by the PINUS Center and the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, IUFRO, specifically our Unit Ecology and Silviculture of Pine. This international organization of forest science research institutes has about 600 members from more than 100 countries, with 9 divisions, of which Division 1 is the Silviculture Division. I thank the PINUS Center for the challenge launched to co-organize this cycle of events to know better about the different pine species, and also thank Dr. Tadesse for his availability to share the results of a review on patula pine in Africa. Dr. Tadesse is currently serving IUFRO as a board member, President's nominee for Africa, and is a deputy on the Ecology and Silviculture of Pine Unit. I wish you a good session on behalf of the group and my fellow delegates.
So now that we present the cycle, let's focus on today's webinar. I would like to introduce today's speakers, Wubalem Tadesse. Teresa already said something, but I will do a more specific. Thank you to accept our challenge to introduce the topic of Pinus patula in Africa. Well, Dr. Wubalem Tadesse have a PhD in forest genetics and tree improvement from Polytechnic University of Madrid, Spain, and a master in general forestry from the University of Pinar del Rio, Cuba. Has more than 30 years of professional work experience in forest research and development in Ethiopia. Since April 2018, to date, he is working as a lead researcher at Ethiopian Forestry Development, former Ethiopian Environment and Forest Research Institute. We also served Ethiopian Environment and Forest Research Institute as a founder general director for 3 years. He has conducted numerous forestry and natural resource related research projects and published his results in 17 book chapters, 32 journal articles, 18 proceedings, and edit 7 proceedings. He is currently serving IUFRO as a board member, president nominated from Africa. Hi, Wubalem Tadesse. I invite you to join us by turning on your camera and microphone. I would like to start by thank you for making the time to share your expertise with us. The floor is yours, Dr. Wubalem.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the review of Pinus patula in Africa. Thank you for the opportunity. Is it visible?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Wait a little bit.
Let me try to
Okay. No problem.
share again.
You can use the green. Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Let's wait. Is that fine? Can you see?
It disappeared. Could you please repeat? Sharing.
Share screen. Just a second.
Yes. Okay, it's okay.
It's just necessary.
Very sorry.
Yes.
So now share screen.
Yes, sure. You can share.
And now you can select the
The
slideshow.
Slideshow, yeah. Is
Great.
it fine?
Fine.
I
Thank
start?
You could start.
Okay, thank you very much. So the title of my presentation is Pine Silviculture Plantations in Africa, an overview of its silvicultural traits and use under the SDG Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a presentation prepared by myself and Teresa Fonseca. And the content of my presentation will be, I will have a brief introduction about the contribution of forest sector in Africa, and then distribution on ecology of Pine Silviculture, then silvicultural characteristics of Pine Silviculture. This will have 3 species characteristics: growth and dynamics and yield, silvicultural guidelines, models to support decision-making processes, pests and diseases, and then in interests of Pine Silviculture within the framework of Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 15, and conclusion. This presentation is extracted from a book chapter prepared by myself and Teresa. And this is a link presented. This is the whole, the content of the presentation is found in the book I have in the link that we have here. To start here is the introduction. Forest resources have paramount socioeconomic and ecological importance in the world, but especially in African countries. Forestry resources contribute to poverty alleviation in a variety of ways and provide very important support, mainly for sub-Saharan African countries. It has a lot of contribution in economic, social, cultural, and environmental development, especially in the rural areas. Over 2/3 of all Africans rely directly or indirectly on forest resources for their livelihood. For instance, to construct houses, the energy, more than 80% energy in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa mainly, is biomass-based. That is, you can see here, for instance, for wood for construction purpose, non-timber forest products in the forest. This is very important. For instance, in Ethiopia, most farmers describe trees around their homestead as lifesavers, safety net, or tree bank, as it is converted easily, because the poor farmers, the poor householders, if they have half hectare or a quarter of hectares with eucalyptus or wood, if they have problems with the kids, they can cut 1 or 2 trees, they can sell it. So that is ready-made product. That's why that is a certificate or tree bank for the poor farmers, especially here in Ethiopia. However, deforestation and forest degradation are hampering the forest resources of many countries in the continent, including my own, Ethiopia. Deforestation and forest degradation are serious challenges in the continent. These forests have come under severe pressure from a growing demand for forest products, particularly fuel, wood, and expansion of agricultural land. You can see from the picture, steep slopes are cultivated. You can see the agricultural expansion, free grazing, and you can see the erosions, etc. These are, as you can see, these pictures are from Ethiopia. How agricultural expansion is moving towards the steep slopes. The use of planted forests is a strategy that supports and benefits the achievement of SDG 15. To this end, knowledge of the biological traits and silviculture of forest species and decision on what appropriate species to use is very essential. The information here presented intends to provide guidance on the use of this species, that is Pinus patula, one of the high-value, fast-growing, and multi-purpose species, option to consider when the aim is to ensure the sustainability of the forest resources of the continent in Africa. Now I will continue talking about distribution and ecology of Pinus patula in Africa. Pinus patula is known that is forestry species native to Mexico and widely cultivated in tropical and subtropical regions. The species is largely used for plantation. The species is largely used for plantation in tropical and subtropical regions of the world, including South America, Central America, and in Africa, Central and South Africa, and in Asia, Southern Asia, including Australia. Pinus patula in Africa was introduced in 1907. It was introduced in South Africa first time. The area planted now with Pinus patula worldwide is approximately 1 million hectares, of which 95% correspond to plantations in Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. Probably is the most widely planted pine in tropical Africa. The species is of particular importance in many African countries. For instance, in Kenya, where it accounts for about 25% of all forest plantations or commercial plantations. It is also important species in Madagascar, Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. In South Africa, the first introduced in the continent, 54% of the total forested area is pine forest, with Pinus patula being the most widely planted, about 375,000 hectares with Pinus patula in South Africa. Coming to Ethiopia, my country, Pinus species, there are a number of Pinus species introduced in my country, in Ethiopia. And the first Pinus species in Ethiopia was introduced in 1955 from Australia. A number of exotic species, for instance, eucalyptus and other acacia species were introduced. Coming to Pinus, Pinus radiata, Pinus halepensis, Pinus patula, Pinus sabinania, Pinus sembra, Pinus excelsa, calambrica, Pinus ponderosa, Pinus pinaster, Pinus pinea, Pinus canariensis, Pinus radiata were the first introduced Pinus species. And Pinus patula and Pinus radiata are the well-adapted and widely distributed Pinus species in Ethiopia. Pinus patula is one of the 3 commercially planted timber-producing species in Ethiopia. The most widely planted commercial species in Ethiopia is the eucalyptus and Necus cupressus lusitanica, and the third one is Pinus patula. Pinus patula is well-adapted Pinus species. We have the well-adapted Pinus species in addition to Pinus patula and radiata are Pinus maximioni and Pinus taeda. These are Pinus species well-adapted only in the research sites. They are not yet widely distributed for as commercial purpose. Pinus patula in Ethiopia does well in moist and wet agricultural agroclimatic zones from 1,900 to 3,000 meters above sea level in Ethiopia. Pinus species, Pinus tree plantations are established mainly in Ethiopia in state-owned forests, occupying the third position, as I said before, in terms of plantation area coverage. Pinus and Cupressus species in Ethiopia are basically in state-owned commercial plantations. They contribute to the production of round wood for sawn timber, poles, and posts owing to their rapid growth. Pinus species are considered as fast-growing. The rotation time for Pinus trees is usually about 26 to 30 years. In some cases, the trees are deliberately left for more years than mentioned in order to provide larger size logs. Pinus plantations here in Ethiopia are managed using a plant, clear, fell, and replant. Yes. In most cases, when the rotation age is reached, it is clear cutting and then replant. This is the way mostly used in Ethiopia. Retention of trees in some structure classes for ecosystem maintenance is not a common practice in Ethiopia. That normally is clear cut. In regarding to ecology of Pinus patula is a species that tolerates most soils and will grow in grassland. The species thrives best when there is good water supply, but can also overcome unfavorable conditions. It is often found in pure dense stands, but the occurrence is discontinuous. And now, for much of its range, it develops only in areas accessible to agriculture. Pinus patula demands deep, well-drained soils and grows best in the mist belt regions in South Africa above 1,000 meters above elevation. In South Africa, the species are generally planted in areas with mean annual temperature below 17 degrees centigrade. As I said before, in Ethiopia, the species develops best in good water supplies and in altitudes 1,900 to 3,000. That Ethiopia is very mountainous country. In Southern Africa, coming to phenology of Pinus patula, the female flower starts when trees are 2 to 3 years old, and male flower 1 to 2 years later. The flowering of both male and female cones occur in August, October, with usually a secondary flush of only female cones in January, May. For instance, in Kenya, 2 flushes of male and female flowering normally occur in April, May, and October, November, coinciding with the rainy seasons. Some studies in Zimbabwe show that synchronization of pollen shedding and female receptivity was good at 1,500 meter altitude, whereas pollen shedding occurred progressively later at lower altitude. Outcrossing is predominant and pollination mainly by wind. Female cones mature almost in 2 years, 22 to 30 months. The production of viable seeds starts when trees are 5-year-old and is prolific. It is productive in 8-10 years old trees. Seed dispersal is usually by wind, but sometimes also by birds, rodents, or even by people themselves. Pinus patula is a very demanding, light demanding species. Pine patula is considered, this is very important for the continent. In some countries, Pinus patula is seen as aggressive or invasive species. For instance, it's considered an aggressive pioneer species that grows easily in forest gaps created by fire. In countries like South Africa, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe, it is now considered a serious weed forest edges, moist grasslands, and road cuts. Pinus patula is invasive in parts of Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. I think I have seen literatures also other Pinus species like Pinus pinaster in South Africa is considered as invasive species. And the same is true with Pine spatula in these countries, South Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya. It seems it has this very aggressive and very important to take note on this behavior of the Pine spatula in the continent. Regarding silvicultural characteristics of Pine spatula, I will say three special characteristics: growth, dynamics, and yield. Pine spatula is fast grows in the continent. It's considered as a fast growing species. Under favorable conditions, it may attain a height of 50 meters after 8 years and 35 meters after 30 years. The species can reach a diameter at breast height up to 1.2 meters. The bole is usually straight and cylindrical. Sometimes the trunk fork produces 2 or more stems. This is also common in Ethiopian Pine spatula plantation. We have seen trunk forking. When the growing area of the tree is large, wide space plantation, the crown tends to spread out. In terms of shape, the crown can be rounded or spiral shaped. The bark has distinct characteristics depending on the tree's stage of development. When young, it has a reddish orange color and scaly. In contrast, the mature bark is gray, brown, and very vertically. This is a mature plantation picture taken in southwest Ethiopia. Mean annual increment in volume, for instance, 10 to 40 meter cube per hectare per year is recorded in South Africa, ranging from 18 to 28 meter cube per hectare per year. In East Africa, the species can show higher yield than in Southern Africa due to a shorter dry season. The rainy season in East Africa is higher than in South Africa. The total yield, including thinning removals under appropriate conditions, may be 330 to 700 meter cube per hectare. This species presents a wood density around 450 kilogram per meter cube in the dry basis and 580 kilogram per meter cube, that is dried at 12% moisture content. This information in Ethiopia, for instance, is 530 kilogram per meter cube in dried and 573 kilograms with a 12% moisture content. Wood density may vary depending on the altitude, presenting higher values when plantations occurs. I can see. Regarding the three species characteristics, growth, dynamics, and yield, Pine spatula is mainly used for firewood timber, boxes, general purpose, posts treated with wood preservative, pulpwood, shade, and ornamental. The wood is highly appreciated for glued laminated timber for carpentry and furniture after the knots have been removed. It is also suitable for hardboard, particle board, and wood wool. Pine spatula is an important source of pulpwood as well. This is basically for furniture industry is used here in Ethiopia. Regarding the silvicultural guidelines of Pine spatula, also mixed plantation can be found. Normally, Pine spatula is managed in pure stands, pure plantations. Initial spacing in most countries is from 2.4 to 0.75 meter or 3 meters, corresponding to individual growing areas around 6 to 9 meters square. Here in Ethiopia, the normal plantation density, initial plantation density normally is 2 by 2, that is 2,500 per meter per hectare, 2,500 trees individuals per hectare. Generally, for saw logs, closer spacing is recommended for knot-free wood. Wider spacing is recommended on poorer or degraded sites. Saw logs regimes in common use are conceived to have about 150 trees per hectare, with an average diameter at breast height 45 centimeters at 45 yield rotation. or pulp schedules, rotation ranging from 15 years in Swaziland, for example, to 25 years, as recommended in South Africa. During the first year after planting, 2 to 3 operations to control spontaneous vegetation weight are required to reduce the occurrence and growth of competitive vegetation. We have a table with the silvicultural guidelines, for instance, stand establishment, initial spacing, as I said before, 2.5 to 2.7, closer spacing recommended for soil logs, wider spacing for sites. Then after 1 year, or in 1 year time, control of spontaneous vegetation, that is weeding. 2 to 3 times weeding will be important. The vegetation management is performed either manually or chemically. Normally here in Ethiopia, we use manual removal of weeds. After 4 to 6 years pruning, trees are pruned to a height of 2.5 meters. The operation is recommended both for pulp and saw logs schedules. For the production of saw timber, further pruning interventions are recommended at a later age to height 7 to 12 meters. Whenever pruning coincides with the thinning, it is carried out on the trees to be retained. Then thinning, 6 to 15 years. And we have the detailed silvicultural guideline in the literature review of the book, the book I mentioned here, the chapter of book I mentioned earlier. And final harvest, 15 to 45 years, final cut of the living trees, rotation, 15 to 25 years for pulp projects, rotation, 25 to 45 years, saw log schedules. Models, different African countries have developed models to support decision-making processes. Right? Here we have mentioned some models, existing models we found in this link. For instance, these are the calorimetric equation, responsive variable, tree volume, diameter and height in Kenya, and another tree volume in diameter in Rwanda, tree biomass, diameter and crown height in South Africa, tree biomass, diameter and height in South Africa again, and tree volume, basal area in Tanzania. In Tanzania, we have a number of models expressed in different variables. Regarding pests and diseases presented in Pinus patula plantations here in the continent, most of the insect pests harming Pinus patula are defoliators, particularly of the order Lepidoptera, the most noted being the family Archaeomidae, Lasciomidae, Nogetidae, and Saturnidae. These are the most common Lepidopteras in the continent. The damage started from the nursery stage by means of cutworms, several leaf rollers, and defoliators. The pests in plantation include adult leaf-eating beetles, adult bark beetles, as well as sucking insects such as pine woolly aphid. In Ethiopia, very less damage has been recorded regarding pests and disease. The pests in plantations include adult leaf-eating beetles, adult bark beetles, mottled pine bark weevil, as well as sucking insects such as pine woolly aphid. Aphid in Ethiopia was recorded in Cupressus plantations. Diseases of the species comprise foliage, leaf cast, tip, dieback of the branch, and Armillaria root rot. Armillaria root rot was the most common disease associated mainly with pine in Ethiopia. Yes. Sphaerosis sapina was also mentioned as an economically important pathogen of Pinus patula in South Africa, causing rapid dieback and mortality of hail damaged trees. Fusarium, known as the pitch canker fungus, PCF, is one of the most important pathogens to natural and industrial pine forests, being a serious threat to Pinus patula. In addition to insect pests and disease, rodent-induced damage has also been reported in first rotation pine planted in South Africa 4 to 5 years after planting. We have got it from this plantation. Three publication, I mean. 3, mortality was attributed to changes in the structure of shrub and grass assemblage with the plantation, causing rodents to feed on the pine trees. Pine seed predation by mice, an experimental assessment of pine preference. This is from this publication. Now coming to the effects of biodiversity and relevance on above ground carbon stock. The usage of Pinus spatula in plantation systems does not appear to negatively impact biodiversity. There are a number of studies in the continent. For instance, in Kenya, in a study conducted in Western Kenya, the authors reported there was no significant variation in woody species richness among disturbed primary forest, old growth secondary forest, middle-aged secondary forest, mixed indigenous plantation, and Pinus spatula monoculture plantation. So there is no negative effects in terms of biodiversity. Old growth and middle-aged secondary forests had relatively higher woody species diversity indices than Pinus spatula monoculture plantations, but the difference was not statistically significant. Here in Ethiopia, if the Pinus species are planted in a wider spacing, more than 3 by 3, we can see another grass species, 3 species coming. Therefore, there are no biodiversity problems. Regarding the contribution of above ground carbon offset, results indicate that Pinus spatula had a lower carbon stock than other types of forests. This was explained by the smaller stem diameter and wood specific gravity, lower or comparable to other species and forest type in the study, being predominantly associated with the schedules adopted for the plantation of Pinus spatula of short, medium rotation lengths. In Ethiopia, there are also studies about the above ground carbon stocks comparing Pinus spatula with Cupressus lusitanica and eucalyptus. And above ground carbon stock of Pinus spatula was less than Cupressus lusitanica. A short rotation length affects biomass accumulation, which will be comparably lower and wood density. Here in Ethiopia, we have also conducted soil fungal communities under Pinus spatula here in Ethiopia. For instance, this colleague, Alam, assessed the soil fungal communities in Pinus spatula stands, aged 5, 11, or 36 years old, using DNA meta barcoding of these amplicons, and the diversity of ecomycorrhiza fungi was higher in the 5 and 36 year stands than in the 11 years old Pinus spatula stands. A high level of ecomycorrhiza species diversity was observed in young stands, suggesting that these ecomycorrhiza species could compensate for the effect of nutrient stress in these stands. This research, fire occurrence was also considered as a challenge. Interest of Pinus spatula within the framework of the Sustainable SDG Goal 15, reforestation emphasizes the recovery of forest area and can be achieved with the plantation of forest species. Forest plantation is expanding in African countries. The great majority of planted trees are exotic species chosen for their capability to grow rapidly to produce wood desired quality. For instance, eucalyptus is the most widely planted genus, covering 22.4% of all planted area, followed by Pinus. In Ethiopia, as I said before, the most planted species preferred by smallholder farmers is the eucalyptus, and followed by Cupressus lusitanica and then Pinus spatula. Well-managed forest plantation can help to alleviate pressure on natural forest resources. 2 SDG targets are explicitly identified. For instance, ensuring the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of terrestrial and inland freshwater ecosystems and their services. particularly forests 15.1 of the CDG target, and promoting the implementation of sustainable management of all types of forests, halting deforestation, restoring degraded forests, and increasing afforestation and reforestation globally. That is 15.2. Therefore, expansion of fast-growing species, including Pinus patula, will align well with the SDG targets. The use of forest species such as Pinus patula in forestation, afforestation, and reforestation programs in Africa can be beneficial in counteracting or minimizing the patterns of forest area loss. So we have the forest area, but there is a deforestation, but for other land uses, but we have also a afforestation program in the continent. Coming to the conclusion, Pinus patula is a very fast-growing tree species and the most widely planted pine species within African commercial plantations. The species is planted in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, and South Africa, and is mainly used for timber and firewood. The increase in forest area and its maintenance in good conditions contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Agenda 2030. Besides the positive impacts explicitly associated with SDG 15, positive effects of forest sector might be expected in SDG 1, income to fight poverty, SDG 6, freshwater, and SDG 13, carbon capture. Achievement of any of the goals require appropriate knowledge of the forest species, traits, and their adequate forest management. This review presented aims to help accomplish this purpose by providing information of the species. So the full document, the full material of this presentation is found in the book chapter that I mentioned before. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Dr. Tadesse. Well, I remember the audience that this is not a synchronous webinar. This is not a live webinar. This is a synchronous. So I will make some questions to Dr. Tadesse, but I will invite all people that see this webinar to send us comments or questions, and we will do our best to answer to you and ask Ms. Dr. Tadesse to help us to answer some questions that the audience could send us. Well, from your presentation, I have two questions. I would like to know, how is the model of management of these stands of Pinus patula in Kenya and Ethiopia? It's a public administration, or are companies that are manage these areas?
Pinus patula, basically in Ethiopia, are managed by state-owned enterprises. For instance, not by smallholder farmers, by large-scale state-owned commercial enterprises.
Okay, and the land, it's from the state?
Yeah, normally in Ethiopia, the land is property of the state.
Okay, thank you. And your initial communication, you speak about the problem of agricultural degradation, and these plantations have some are used as remediation of this agricultural degradation.
Agricultural expansion is normally a challenge in the country, for instance, in Ethiopia, in most African countries. But when we have large-scale plantation programs owned by the state, then they are protected by the government, by the state. Okay. Normally, the problem is in other land uses, in other forest types.
Okay, thank you. Teresa, I don't know if you want have some more questions that could be relevant for the audience.
Thank you, Margarida. I have no questions to ask to my colleague. I congratulate Dr. Tadesse for this nice presentation, and I'm sure, as Margarida said, that you will be available to answer questions that some participants would like to pose. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
That will be my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Wubalem Tadesse. Thank you, Teresa. And thanks to all of you that follow this webinar. We will invite you to subscribe to Centro PINUS YouTube channel and send us as a comment or questions. We will do our best to answer you. Thank again and pay attention to the next webinar in the series that is planned for June. Bye-bye. See you next webinar.